Welcome inside this week opening edition of Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Rick Pizzo alongside Jake Butt, who has an issue with some rumors circulating ahead of Thursday's NFL draft, specifically at the quarterback position toward the top of the first round.
Well, since we're the Big Ten Network, I just can't believe some of the disrespect that C.J. Stroud has gotten these past couple weeks. All of a sudden, Will Levis, the quarterback from Kentucky, is the odds-on favorite to go number 2. And I just want to ask you, what has changed these past 3 months?
I don't get it either.
What games have been played? Mike Tomlin, when I was getting drafted, I went and had a meeting with him, and he said, hey, just don't listen to what any of these other teams say. You're going to be drafted off your film and your film alone. So we spent the majority of this offseason saying, is it Young or Stroud as a number 1 guy? Now all of a sudden it's Will Levis. I'm just here to back him, to back our conference's best quarterback, C.J. Stroud. I don't know what more he could have put out on film to say he's deserving of being a top 2.
Whether he's in the Big Ten or not, you look at the game film, you look at what he did in that national semifinal, you look at what he did in the Rose Bowl, the one knock, could he use his legs? We saw that at the Peach Bowl. We saw that this year against Michigan. I'm with you. I'm shocked that Stroud is not the favorite over Bryce Young to go number 1. I will be absolutely shocked. I still think he'll go number 2. Maybe this is disinformation.
That's true.
NFL teams use that as well to get other teams off the scent if it's a guy they really want. The draft, of course, comes up first round on Thursday night, rounds 2 and 3 on Friday night. But we begin with the big story, and it's a look back at this past Saturday. Spring football all over the place, all West Division teams in focus. We saw the launch, the start of the Luke Fickell era, unofficially, at Wisconsin. Changes offensively. We saw Matt Rule dial it up at Nebraska, and P.J. Fleck went to the back of the playbook all over the place with new looks on offense. No Tanner Morgan, no Mo Ibrahim, no Ethan Kaliakmanis. We'll get into those teams in just a little bit, but we do start with Wisconsin. And before we dial into this year's personnel, all the talk, Jake, has been about how much Luke Fickell is going to change things, especially schematically, offensively. But we often see it in spring games. The defense is just ahead, and that was the case on Saturday.
And I want to provide some context here before we dive into it, because if you watch that film, you'd say, all right, clearly the defense won the day. But if you just think about it, as you're installing new systems throughout the spring, the first half of the spring, it's advantage offense because the defense hasn't seen these looks. But over the course of 15 practices, now the defense has those pattern recognitions. They can start to, realize what formation, what plays are being run. So as the clock ticks on, the defense has the advantage. The defense certainly won the day. Now, there was a lot of unforced errors, too, from the Wisconsin offense. Tanner Mordecai, in my prep calling the game, consistently people were talking about how great he looks in this new offense. Far too many mistakes. Felt like he was pressing, a number of interceptions.
Which is understandable, too. Try to press on your first kind of look for the coaching staff.
Totally. It's totally understandable. But at the same time, a good quarterback has to take what the defense gives to you. We talked about Phil Longo and how this is going to be an up-tempo offense. They want to snap the ball early in the snap count. And John Wooden has a great quote. Be quick, but don't hurry. And I think there's a difference between tempo and being rushed. And what I felt with that offense was they were rushed at times. And that's what led to some of those unforced errors. So even though the talk of the town is a new passing attack, it's the air raid system, what I came away saying is they're going to need to rely heavily on Braylon Allen and Ches Malusi. That's their bread and butter.
Which is not a bad combination to have to rely on if that's the case. I've had some friends ask me, well, why would you change schemes? It didn't work when Michigan did that with Rich Rodriguez, and they try to completely change it. And my response is, we're in a different day and age. They didn't have transfer portal back then where you could go out and immediately get guys like the nation's leading passer in Tanner Mordecai. And still, I think it's fair or unfair maybe for folks to expect that in year one, you are going to see this brand new offense and it's going to light up the rest of the league. I just don't think that that's reality.
No, I do think you change schemes, though, trying to improve because, looking at Wisconsin last year, they were one-dimensional. Yeah. I don't think any defense that faced them said, hey, we really got to be concerned about the downfield passing attack of Wisconsin. You go out and you change the scheme and you go out and get a guy like Tanner Mordecai and you go out and replenish your receiver room in the transfer portal on top of the guys you have returning to say we want to be multiple. We don't just want teams to respect our running game. We want to be able to stretch the defense horizontally. We want to be able to attack them vertically. Now, All that being said, you can't give the ball away. You have to sustain drive. So there's some good things to come out of the spring game, and they have all summer and all fall camp to get some of those mistakes wrinkled out.
I just think it's fascinating. All this talk about offense. I mean, Luke Fickell by nature is a defensive guy. That's what we knew him at for all those years, player and assistant at Ohio State. But now, after what he did at Cincinnati, you understand why everybody's asking, what can he do at Wisconsin? Right now, being hailed as an absolutely genius hire by Chris McIntosh. Obviously, the proof will be in the pudding. A lot of folks like the hire at Nebraska as well. The Scott Frost experiment just didn't work. So Trev Alberts goes out and gets a proven winner in college in Matt Rule, a guy who turned around programs at Temple, turned around a program at Baylor. There's a lot of work to be done in Lincoln. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I found it fascinating, Jake, that after the spring game, he didn't talk about X's and O's. He didn't talk about execution. He talked about the fact that this team right now doesn't have the competitive stamina and focus that it needs through 14 weeks of Big Ten play and then into the postseason. They're trying to change the culture inside that locker room and what this team believes it can actually accomplish.
Well, think about, he's saying that to the media, but what he's talking to his team when he says that as well, right? He's sending a message to that locker room. Guys, don't feel good about the work we put in this spring. We still have much more work to do. And when you look at the team under Scott Frost, competitive stamina, they had the worst record in one-score games across all of college football. That's X's and O's, but it's also competitive stamina and finding a way to win. So when I hear Matt Rule say that, I really think he's sending a message to his guys. We still have a lot of work ahead of us.
So what'd you take away from their spring game? You have a running back room that's really deep. You have a quarterback situation that we didn't really get to see any of because Casey Thompson and Logan Smothers, the top two guys, they didn't take a single snap, really didn't play at all during the spring.
Yeah, well, Matt Rule is the number one storyline, the quarterback has to be the number two storyline. And they brought in Jeff Sims from Georgia Tech. You mentioned Casey Thompson was not fully healthy. And one thing that stood out to me is Jeff Brom likes his mobile quarterbacks. We saw that with what he did with P.J. Walker in Carolina. He likes guys that can solve issues with their feet. And as they're trying to build out this run game, what I noticed was read options and triple options. They were involving these guys, not just handing the ball off to the running backs, but seeing the quarterbacks get involved in the run game. And if that's his vision for the offense, that's what Jeff Sims does really, really well. I came away wondering in this is, do they have a multiple quarterback system because each guy has their own strengths?
I kind of thought you might go there.
Yeah. We saw it in Michigan, right, with J.J. McCarthy and Cade McNamara. It doesn't always work, but if you are going to involve the quarterback into your run game, then you got to put the best guy on the field that can do that.
That's interesting. Now, defensively, I think they were probably more pleased maybe than they expected to be, not just from the stamina standpoint, but from the X's and O's standpoint. This is a team that I think doesn't bring back a ton of stars, and kind of the emotional leader, Garrett Nelson, is gone. But I think they have depth back there, and they have pieces that this defense could maybe be better than people expect.
And they're implementing a new system, the 3-3-5 system. Yeah. And what I noticed on the tape, really, when you looked at that game, was they were able to create a lot of havoc with their blitz packages. You're going to see in these next three clips, linebackers are adding in. You have secondary elements, 3-3-5, there's 5 secondary elements that are now able to get into the box. And the challenges that presents to the offensive line is it's a less clean picture. They have to identify those 5 guys in the running back, who has who. And you see these guys are stacked constantly, and the offensive line was struggling to say, all right, you have this guy running back, you have this guy, and all of a sudden you have a lot of pressure on your quarterback right away, which certainly isn't a recipe for success. The spring games, though, you take the good of the defense and say, well, what does the offense need to do? And I felt last year the offensive line struggled to keep a clean pocket for their quarterback. It again showed up in the spring game.
Yeah, Matt Rule was asked by Megan McEwen after the game, like, what'd you think about the defense? Pretty good. He said, well, I'm a head coach, so when I think the defense was good, I think my offense was really bad.
Right.
Because something always has to get fixed in the head coach's office. Minneapolis has been a place where the head coach, I think, has fixed some stuff as of late, and we'll get to P.J. Fleck and what he's done in just a bit. There's also a new guy at Purdue, and that's Ryan Walters. Now, we didn't see much of Purdue because it was kind of a closed practice on Saturday. We didn't get to see a lot of what they're trying to install. We know Hudson Card is right now expected to be the guy, but Aiden O'Connell is gone. He was a guy who threw the ball all over the yard last year. A lot of pieces are gone from this team that offensively has been really effective. And you bring in a defensive-minded coach to run a team that has long been considered offensive first and foremost. I think there's going to be a fascinating transition in how Ryan Walters handles everything.
Yep, and You bring in a defensive guy, but again, head coach is his title, right? So he goes out and delegates the offensive duties to offensive coordinator Graham Harrell. You go out and you get Hudson Card in the transfer portal. And in spring ball, you kind of have to read between the lines, right? We don't have game film to watch. The spring game, obviously, a unique situation. You look at what the team is saying. Defensive guys are saying Hudson Card's the truth. The coaching staff said Hudson Card has had a great spring.
They really like him.
They really like him. Now, the key is it wasn't just Aiden O'Connell gone. Charlie Jones is gone. Payne Durham, the tight end, is gone. Those were your three biggest pieces. So it's encouraging that they're saying Hudson Card is doing well, because that means he's finding new pieces to go out there and excel. I think the offense, Jeff Brom is a very unique coordinator. A lot of trick plays, a lot of downfield passing attack. It'll still have those air raid principles. So I think they need to maintain that same structure. The difference will be what the defense looks like.
So as a head coach, Ryan Walters walks in, and I know he's going to say Graham Harrell, who, by the way, I'm surprised he even has an arm left after the number of passes that he threw in college at Texas Tech. So that is going to be their identity. How involved will Ryan Walters be? What's your guess? First-year head coach, but you come from doing an unbelievable job as a DC at Illinois. You generally tend to start to lean back to your beginnings and what you believe in. Does he take the role of CEO, or does he kind of lean on that defensive side a little bit more?
You're not going to like this answer, but I would say it depends. Where is he needed most, right? If the offense is operating well without him and the defense needs some extra juice, he might stay on the defense for a couple practices and get some of their mistakes straightened out. On the flip side, if the defense is doing well and the offense is struggling, he might come over there and say, hey, here's the things. Being a great defensive mind can benefit the offense, because you know what stresses you out as a defensive coordinator. So if the defense is doing great, you can go over to the offense and say, hey, guys, maybe try these things. This is the weak points of our defense. So a good head coach should have some fluidity.
And by the way, you're wrong. I didn't mind that answer at all. I know you're kind of on the fence a little bit, but that's okay, because I think Ryan Walters, with his first year, he's probably figuring out some of this stuff as he goes as well.
Early enrollees coming in, freshmen coming onto campus soon. Are you starting to feel old yet, or what?
Hey, I get called uncle sometimes in the locker room, so I don't really like that, but it is what it is. And I've been here going on 7 years coming June, so it is what it is. I'm gonna be the uncle of the team, so yeah.
What's your biggest piece of advice for those younger guys coming up?
Be yourself, take your time. You don't know how much time you have with this, so just enjoy it, enjoy everything, work as hard as you can, and love life and love what you do.
Yes, we're back on Big Ten today. And yes, Crab, as they call him, or Chris Altman-Bell, year 7 since he started in Minneapolis. It's hard to believe, man.
I mean, he could have a doctorate by now, right? Like that's the world we're living in college football.
4 years in the NFL. He could be done your rookie contract in the NFL. Instead, he has one more year with PJ Fleck and the Gophers. And it is, I don't want to ever say rebuilding year, because PJ Fleck would hear that. Everybody would put the chip on the shoulder. They go out, win 8 or 9 games, and compete in the Big Ten West again. But it is a year of transition, because Tanner Morgan gives the reins to Ethan Kaliak-Manis. Mo Ibrahim, the heart and soul of this team for the last couple of years, is gone. Other important players on both sides are gone. What do you see in the immediate future for Minnesota?
That's a great lead into my thoughts, where I had some concerns going into this offseason for Minnesota. You're right, rebuilding may not be the right word, but it's true to acknowledge how much they're losing from a veteran playing time standpoint, as well as leaders on both sides of the ball. That being said, you look at the spring ball and you say, I think the offense is going to be okay. Kaliak-Manis, I think the word playmaker fits for him. He can push the ball down the field. He does some really nice things with his feet. They do have some young running backs, and they went in the transfer portal to supplement that. Chris Altman-Bell, 7 years in college football. The game must have slowed down significantly for him. I love my tight ends. Brevin Spanford is a playmaker. The defense was a concern to me as well. They lost a number of corners to the transfer portal. They lost guys across the D-line, the linebackers. This is where I want to go with this. I think whereas offense, you need players. You need a talented quarterback. You need playmakers, whether in the running back or receiver position. The unit defense can make up for a lack of individual talent. And Joe Rossi's a great defensive coordinator, where if he can get those 11 guys playing on the same page, regardless of the individual talent, a good defense should be like a wall that's hard to break through, as long as they're all doing their job and playing off each other.
And they have done a really nice job. I'm with you defensively, and there's now some consistency there defensively, of course. Offensively, for the second time in the PJ Fleck era, Kirk Ferentz leaves Minneapolis for another OC job. So another transition, though, with Callie McManus coming in, yes, you need to learn a new system, but Tanner Morgan was the starter for most of the year until he got injured late in the season. So maybe that transition not quite as difficult for a young guy still learning some of those new tricks. Meanwhile, in Champaign, it's hard to believe it's already year 3 of the Brett Bielema era. Feels like we just introduced Brett coming back after Arkansas and then a couple of years in the NFL and learning a lot of stuff. Listen, they were a game away last year on a couple of different occasions from getting to the Big Ten championship game. They lose a lot on the back end. And of course, they lose defensive coordinator Ryan Walters. I think any conversation, even with Tommy DeVito and Chase Brown gone, I think you still need to start with how they replace all those stars defensively.
Devin Witherspoon projected top 10 picks. Sidney Brown, day 2. I mean, you're right. The back end of the defense is a concern. That being said, I look at this front 7, and I don't see why they can't be one of the more talented fronts, if not the most talented front in all of the Big Ten. You got the law firm back in Randolph and Newton. You know, I heard Brett Bielema talk about just the big 5, those 5 guys across the defensive line, the linebackers. That's the heart and soul there. So if your back end of your defense is strong, that benefits the front end, right? Well, now if the front end's there, they're going to need to get to the quarterback as they're figuring out some of these new pieces. The good thing is Aaron Henry was promoted from within, so he's the defensive coordinator. They're going to run the same system. Aaron Henry was the secondary coach last year.
DB's guy, yeah.
So the defensive coordinator, his strength is going to be in that defensive back room, and that's great for him because he can just let that front 7 do what they do and focus his time to raise the floor, the back end of the defense.
Yeah, Newton and Randolph, guys who maybe became national names on some level last year. Watch for Tariq Barnes this year. I think he's a guy that could absolutely explode linebacker-wise. They do have questions, obviously, at quarterback. They bring in a couple of transfers, really like Luke Altmaier, the transfer from Ole Miss. Tommy DeVito was really good. I think overlooked how efficient he was last year. And, of course, how do you make up for the loss of Chase Brown?
You don't make up for a guy like Chase Brown. You don't just say 1 for 1. Well, maybe some teams do if you're really lucky, but that's not going to be the case here in Illinois. You know, I think Barry Lundy Jr. is an excellent offensive coordinator. He did a good job of implementing his system last year. And for Tommy DeVito, he didn't have to go in and do anything special. He could just do his job and play within the system. Now, you look at what they did last year. We were covering some games where Chase Brown had 50 touches. Now you look at the receiver room, everyone they're returning. Isaiah Williams, Pat Bryant, Casey Washington, Hank Beatty, a receiver that's been having a good spring. I wonder if they lean more towards getting the ball on the edge in some quick games to supplement the lack of talent, though they still have a pretty talented running back room. It just might look a little different.
Yeah, Reggie Love and Josh McCray have been there. I mean, they've combined to go over for 1,000 yards at Illinois. It's just that, again, you're exactly right. No one guy is going to step in and be the human eraser that Chase Brown was for this team. All right, lastly, the more things change in a lot of other places, the more they stay the same in Iowa City. There were calls for change, certainly from outside their locker room, namely from offense. Would Brian Ferentz be back? He is. Obviously, Phil Parker is back. A lot of names are different, but Spencer Petras is gone, and many believe that gives a fresh start to this Iowa offense. And all the eyes are going to be on this offense because I think defensively we'll see the same thing that we've seen for the last 2+ decades.
Phil Parker's Phil Parker. Even though they're replacing a lot of talent defensively, again, the unit will make up for individual talent. We listened to Brian Ferentz talk throughout the spring ball, and he was asked, is there going to be a new wrinkles to this offense? And he's basically said no. They're going to run the same system. Now, let me just play devil's advocate here because that might send some panic to people. But, you know, when I was covering them last year, again, trying to read between the lines, to me, they didn't feel that this was a system thing. They could have the best offense in the world. I felt the offensive line didn't play good enough. And when that's the case, you can't run the ball. You can't keep Spencer Petras clean. So that's a foundational issue. A lot of guys are back, a year older, a year wiser. The game should slow down. You expect that unit to take a step forward. Caleb Johnson, now he's back, a talented running back. I think he's ready to take that next step. Now you bring in Cade McNamara from Michigan. Luke Lachey is back at tight end. You bring Eric All in from Michigan. You start to see how this offense, just off those pieces alone, even running the same system as last year, should improve. You keep Cade clean, you throw the ball to the tight ends, you establish a run game, you play good defense. That's how Iowa has always been, and I expect that to be the same. They really do need to improve the offense.
I've got to tell you, though, Jake, we're going to know right away. You start to look at Iowa's non-con, you go, oh, it's Utah State, Iowa State. Those are 2 dangerous teams. That's how you start. And remember, they started slow last year in the non-conference. You have Utah State at home, then you have to go to Ames after Iowa State beat you last year in that nasty game that we covered on Big Ten Network. They beat you in Iowa City. And then, by the way, you open Big Ten play against Penn State. I mean, it's going to have to be in system, and it's going to have to be ready from the jump for the Hawkeyes.
If you want to go 3-0 to start the season, which would then put you in a nice momentum to get to Indianapolis and compete for a Big Ten title, you can't have your defense and special teams outscore your offense, right? We can't expect Iowa to start slow. There's no time to start slow. Those are 3 challenging games, winnable, but challenging games. The offense is going to need to put up 20, 25 points.
I think it's one of the more interesting stories because we will chat with Kirk Ferentz coming up in just a bit, and we will ask him about dealing with the criticism and keeping the status quo. It's something that he has done for a quarter century, and he's done it pretty well. Everybody forgets all the criticism last year. Friday after Thanksgiving, had that man's team knocked off Nebraska in Lincoln, they would have been back in the Big Ten championship game. We'll chat with Kirk Ferentz coming up next right here on Big Ten Today. As we look at Iowa's offseason, couple of notable additions from the transfer portal. At quarterback, you have Cade McNamara, Deacon Hill, Eric All, terrific tight end coming from Michigan. Of course, that tight end position has been one of strength for the Iowa Hawkeyes for years, and now with Sam Laporta gone, could All step in and partially fill those shoes. Of course, who will step in, not just from a production, but a leadership standpoint for guys like Jack Campbell and Riley Moss, who have been such a big part of that Iowa defense. Well, to answer all those questions, let's go straight to the source. Kirk Ferentz joining us for today's big interview. Kirk, first and foremost, always great to catch up. I want to start with something that you said after the spring practice on Saturday, that it was, quote, a very important phase for your team. Why is that the case right now?
Yeah, good to see you, Rick. And it's kind of that way for us. Every phase for us is important, whether it's a winter conditioning program, which roughly ran about 8 weeks. Then we transitioned into spring football, and we take 5 weeks to do that. And it's a really good teaching period. I think it's probably as enjoyable time of the year as there is for us outside of guys, that are injured. But, it's an opportunity to be on the field with the guys in quality practice situations where you're not trying to get a game plan in, no deadline that way. It's just pure teaching. You can kind of move at the pace that the team's ready to go at. And then the other component is you got really good meeting time to go with that. So it's an opportunity for guys to learn in the classroom and not only, learn what their skills are and how to execute the fundamentals, but also how those things tie together with the other positions. So it's a really important stage for us. It's a really important phase. And I think the guys did a good job. They really made all 15 practices count. Some were better than others, but I think we really made some progress out there. And, it's hardly a pretty picture where everything's ready to pull together and play a game. That's not the goal in spring, but it's all about individual advancement. And something you touched on just in the intro there is developing leadership, too, because we lost not only a handful of really good players, but really good leaders on our team. And a lot of those guys will get called in the draft here this coming weekend. So, you lose good players on the field, but you lose the leadership core also, and it's an ongoing process.
Kirk, I think I've gotten to know you well enough over the last 15 years that I can say that no matter what happens on the outside in the offseason, whether you, your staff, your team is receiving praise or criticism, you kind of stay pretty much the same guy. So what's the key to staying the course this year? No changes, no major staffing changes. What's the key to staying the course regardless of what you hear from outside that Iowa locker room?
Well, unlike maybe 23 years ago, we've got a little bit of a resume that's been built. And I guess over time, hopefully you figure out what works well and what doesn't work so well. And one thing I do know is being distracted by things outside the building can really take you off the course, and it's not going to help you be productive. So, what we choose to do is we try to focus on what we're doing here and, more importantly, on our players. And that's really all that counts. That's our job, to really do the best we can do for our players that are here on campus, whether it's their educational component, their social component, or what they're doing in football. And, we're trying to build a good team each and every year. That starts in January. It's a different challenge each and every year. And so at the end of the year, you go back, review, and, what would we do differently? You debrief and, try to figure out what we would have done differently, how we need to change moving forward, and then, focus on that moving forward. And that's an ongoing piece, too, because your team's always changing, whether it be injuries, transfers, et cetera. So, we just try to keep our eyes on the road, if you will, and just worry about what we're doing And hopefully it's going to be good enough to put us in championship contention. But it's it's a fine line, and to worry about stuff on the outside is really kind of a distraction.
Kirk, has that gotten harder than it was 23, 24, 25 years ago?
Not necessarily for me, but I think there's no question our players face more things to be distracted by than they ever. This is unprecedented times, and then we've even created rules now which create more distraction, if you will, for them, or more opportunity to make decisions. And so it's a changing world. I think it's a tough time to be tougher than any time to be an educator, to be a parent, to be a coach. But it's part of the challenge of it too, and it's part of the fun of it. And just it's we're in the business of education, so you're trying to always educate your players or your kids at home if you're a parent. Just on how to make good decisions, how to understand where they're trying to go, and what's going to help them get there the best.
Kirk, as we focus on your team, I know so many players were limited with various either injuries or recovering from potential off-season surgeries. How do you approach that in spring ball, and then maybe use it to your advantage to see guys who need to be contributors come fall time?
I can cherry pick a really easy example. Last year, all three of our linebackers that were going to be starters this year weren't out there in the spring. They had surgeries they had to have taken care of. So it really gave the younger guys like Jay Higgins, a real chance to operate in a good environment. And we saw those guys kind of elevate their play. They kind of rose to the level of ones, if you will. And this year, both our starting defensive tackles were out. Noah Shannon, who's back for his extra year, and then Logan Lee were both out. So you think about a guy like Aaron Graves, Jeremiah Pittman, both those guys did a great job this spring and made major strides. I'm not sure they would have if those other guys were out there. So sometimes there's opportunity in that, and there's nothing you can do about it anyway. It's just part of football, unfortunately. It's a tough part about football, but sometimes injuries keep guys off the field. But it gives other guys a chance and an opportunity to work and move forward. And the good news is, the guys that were out, we'll have everybody back at full strength here in June, and that's encouraging when the summer program begins.
Now, Cade McNamara is in that group recovering from a knee surgery. What have been your impressions of both him and Deacon Hill, who after the game on Saturday, you said if it were starting right now, he'd be QB2?
Yeah, first I'll start with Cade. That's an easy one for us because it's one of those unusual situations where we played against him as a starting quarterback a year ago, December. So we'd seen, his body of work. We'd seen his film during the course of the season, and obviously got to see him, live and in person, unfortunately, at the wrong end of a score. So we were really impressed with him on film. And then, when you're on the field with a really good player, you usually can feel that and just kind of sense that. So, to have him on our sideline right now is, I'm not sure how it happened, but I'm glad it did. I spent 6 years in the NFL, and it's kind of getting like, a playoff quarterback or a Super Bowl quarterback from another team to come join your franchise. That's a pretty good deal. Doesn't happen very often. So we're really excited about that. I think he's got a chance to be a great player. More importantly, he is a really strong presence. He is a leader. That's, a key component of that position. And, he's got a resume, which, it's not somebody we're projecting. He's got a resume. And I can't think of a situation like that I've ever been in as a coach. So that's been great. He's had a really positive impact on our team. He did everything but teamwork this spring, and can see a lot of good things there. So we're excited about that. And then Deacon's been a really good addition as well. And Cade is clearly our starter right now. And Deacon and Joe Labus, who did a great job last December in the bowl game for us, they had a really nice competition going all spring long. And both players have taken, I think, major strides, moving forward. And so, it's a really competitive situation with both those guys. See a lot of positives with both. And I think overall that room right now, only three guys in there, but it's a really healthy competition, a really good group of guys. And they think right, they act right, and they've all made major strides. Kate, a little bit different category again.
At the line of scrimmage, Kirk, you mentioned a couple of the D linemen who weren't really able to go, but when they return, you are going to be so deep at that position. There is some depth and experience on offensive line as well. Again, injuries affecting that, but there's probably going to be some unique lineups there, some potential position changes. What have you been able to glean with the guys who have actually been on the field when you look up front?
Yeah, the thing that's probably been as big of a detriment, if you will, to our offensive production, I think, is the last 2 years. We just haven't been at the level we'd like to be. And that's not a knock on the guys playing at all. I mean, Tyler Linderbaum's as good a player as you're going to find in college football. But, it wasn't enough. Just one guy's not enough. And I think we've lacked the maturity, the experience maybe that you'd like to have up there. And I feel right now like we're making good strides there. And two ones I can cherry pick real easily. Logan Jones last year was a first-year starter. We had moved him over from defense. Did it in spring last year. Probably should have done it in bowl prep 2 years ago, but we did it in spring. And played well last year, but he was out there surviving. Right now, I think he's got a chance to really play the way God wants to play up front. And he's a more confident guy now for obvious reasons. After playing 13 games, he's a lot more decisive for 13 games. He's more experienced. He's more physical, stronger, older, all that kind of stuff. Another one to cherry pick would be Nick DeYoung, who's a walk-on player for us, has done a lot of good things in 2 years. But he's always kind of been nagged by injuries. He's been healthy this whole out of season. Had a really good winter program and had 15 days where, for the first time we've seen him flash, but he looked like a confident player out there for the first time and a consistent player. So you start with those two guys. Mason Richmond was out with a surgery. He's rehabbing right now. Should be full speed in June. He's played a lot of good football for us. We're counting on him taking another step, being a more experienced guy. So, you go through the list. Long story short, I think we have a chance not only to be better up front, but have some real true competition up front too, with as many as 8-9 guys, fighting for maybe a starting job here. And that's how you get better, just having good competition on a daily basis.
Kirk, we should hear the names of several former Hawkeyes later this week with the NFL draft. One guy who's maybe getting talked about as much as anybody is Lucas Van Ness, projected in a bunch of mocks as maybe being a top 10 pick come this Thursday night. When did you see his potential in Iowa City?
I still remember the first time I saw him in school up at Barrington High School. He was in the library. He was a junior, and his sister was a student here. That's all Coach Sanchez told me was, Lucas Van Ness over there. Good-looking, kind of linear-built guy. And then 6 months later, he showed up at camp. He was a little bit more physically developed at that point, 6 months, down the road. Did a really nice job in our camp, and we ended up offering him a scholarship coming out of that whole thing. And then you look at the ascension that he's made. So he was not a national recruit by any stretch coming out of high school. He's done a really nice job here, and there's no question in my mind his best football is in front of him, kind of like Tristan Wirfs a couple of years back. When he came out, as good as Tristan was, I thought he it was just kind of scratching the surface. And I think it's the same thing with Lucas. Zero's kind of been doing that. And, somebody's going to end up really happy with him, whoever ends up drafting him. He's a hardworking guy, got good ability and a great attitude.
All right, lastly, Kirk, let's take this full circle because I mentioned the departures, obviously, of Jack Campbell and Riley Moss and what they will mean both on and off the field. For you, as a coach who spends so much time with those guys who meant so much to this program and really kind of embodied Iowa Hawkeye football, what's going to be the hardest part for you about not having them in the locker room and on the field?
That's college football, and it's high school football too. Is it's a great age to work with, but the downside is that you're going to have graduation every year, so you have a new roster, and you're always going to have guys that you've been around for a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years, that have done so much for the team, the program, etc. And they're going to graduate and go on to the next phase of their life. Whether you're a high school coach, they go off to college, or in our case, they go off to the real world, or they go to the NFL. And it's just one of the neat things. But it's it's kind of bittersweet. You're excited for their opportunities and the things that are in front of them, but you're also it's hard because it's a big loss to what it is that you've tried to do with those guys. But it's just how life flows, and as they graduate, it opens up opportunity for other guys to emerge as those leaders and the guys everybody's going to look to on our football team. So I think that's really part of the fun of it. It keeps you, keeps you really engaged in things. And but it's just those are guys who are quality guys. All three of them were there Saturday. I didn't see Jack, but I know Sam was there, and Riley was on the field half hour after the practice. So those guys are just guys that like football. They like the program. They like being around, and just happy for all of them. Kayvon was here. I know has been here training. Now they're all kind of, scattering, getting in position for the draft. But wish all those guys the best. They'll do a great job, as will the guys that aren't going to be in the NFL.
Iowa opening up the 2023 season at home against Utah State. First Big Ten game on the road against Penn State. Always great to catch up with Kirk Ferentz. Kirk, we appreciate the time. We'll talk again soon.
Likewise, Rick. Thank you.
Critical weekend in Big Ten baseball. Iowa sweeping Nebraska. That means there is a whole bunch of movement inside the Big Ten standings. Indiana now in first in the league at 9-3. Maryland, Michigan, Iowa, Michigan State, Rutgers, Nebraska, and Purdue. All those teams have winning records. That's just how tight it is, all the way from number 2 down to number 10 inside the Big Ten. And with all that in mind, welcome in Big Ten Network baseball analyst Michael Huff. We can't overstate just how big this weekend was for the Iowa Hawkeyes to sweep Nebraska, not just in the Big Ten race, but obviously what it could potentially mean for their NCAA at-large hopes.
Yeah, both of these ball clubs were kind of sitting with nice overall records. Both of them had some really nice wins against some non-conference and ranked teams earlier in the year. And so this was really boiling down to a team, Nebraska, great defensively, really good offensively, and solid pitching against an Iowa team. Incredible pitching and solid defense, solid hitting. And who was going to move the rock or the hard place? And it seemed like Iowa just did everything right. Little bit of a gift on Friday. You know, the Nebraska pitchers, Emmett Olson has had such a great year to this point. 10 walks in that game one, so high scoring on both sides. But the next 2 days, you got to tip your cap to those Iowa pitchers. Oh my gosh, did they just step up and do a great job.
How about against that lineup, Michael, to be able to limit Nebraska to 7 runs in 3 games?
Yeah, you think about those 2 middle infielders you have with Max Anderson hitting over 400, Bryce Matthews like top of the Big Ten in home runs, let alone high 300 batting average. You got those guys that you're going to face 4 or 5 times in a game, and they were able to shut them down and keep them controlled to the most part. And the other nice thing is that the Iowa pitchers really did a good job of not letting the role players, the Mike Huffs of the world, the 7, 8, 9, the 1-2 guys necessarily having a big day, getting on base, and doing some things that could have allowed Nebraska to have a big inning. Never happened. And so, again, those last 2 pitchers for Iowa were just incredible.
Anderson and Matthews did have 7 hits over the weekend series. Didn't get a lot of help, as you talked about, above and behind them to kind of get things started for the Huskers, and that's been the case pretty much all year long with their bats have been really good, but not over the last 3 days against Iowa. Battle of the Mitten State goes to Michigan. Yeah. Wolverines take the first 2 games. Now, Michigan State avoids the sweep with a really impressive offensive performance in game number 3. But this is a Michigan team, Michael, that I don't think we've been talking about a lot, that appears to really be rounding back into form under a guy who has had some success.
Little success in the Big Ten. You're absolutely right. With Tracy Smith coming back, I think, again, just elevates the Big Ten overall. You think about the resume he had at Indiana, did a great job at Arizona State, sending a lot of guys into the pro ranks. And so now he's back at Michigan. And like you said, under the radar right now in that they don't have a great overall record. Again, Tracy did a good job like he always does. Let's go out and play some tough non-con games, and they didn't really have the success. But now they're starting to roll, and they have this incredible lefty, Connor O'Halloran. We're going to talk about him in just a little bit. But you feel really good when this guy goes out there on Friday that you're going to probably be leading a series after that Friday game. And then can you have your number 2 and 3? The people that Tracy is bringing in has an incredible freshman in center field right now in John Kim that is literally hitting almost 400. And so now when you can start to be strong up the middle, Tracy Smith, you've got Ted Burton, a great shortstop who's been there for a long time. You start with a Connor O'Halloran that's going to probably win you a Friday. You're feeling pretty good. And for Michigan State, what a great year for Jake Boss. And their entire infield, you think about Brock Vradenberg, you think about Mitch Jebb, Trent Farquhar. You've got 3 guys that have been there for a couple of years. Mitch Jebb, great summer out in Cape Cod, was a number 3 overall prospect out in the Cape. So those guys came back and they started to feel like we can win, and they have non-con and in conference. So this was a really big battle, and I think, like you said, it was huge for Michigan State to get that game on Sunday, because if Michigan sweeps, now you start to question yourself, not so much, are we a good team? You start to say, wait a minute, this Michigan team is good, not great. How do we lose all 3? And that whole mojo you've had to this point just gets truncated.
Had to steal at least 1. Maryland had to get at least 2 from Purdue and they did. This is a series in which you have to win. Purdue was way deep in the national RPI. So for Maryland to keep any at-large chances alive, had to take 2 or 3. That's what they did.
They did. It might have come at a cost. We talk about Nick LaRusso, tweaked his hamstring on that Sunday last game, and this guy's leading the Big Ten in home runs, let alone he's leading Maryland just about every offensive category. Offense, batting average, home runs, RBIs, pulled himself out of the game. Hopefully it's very minor. But like you said, Purdue is a team that I love. I mean, this is a Michael Huff team. They are scrappy. They're going to steal bases. They're going to put pressure on you, hit and run. And you look at, again, not a great overall record, but they've done everything right in the Big Ten. And with a team that's based on speed, nice pitching, good defense, and really based on fundamentally sound baseball, bunting, hitting and running, playing to get the runners over, you probably are not going to go into a whole lot of slumps. And you're going to put pressure on teams every day of a 3-game series. And like you said, Maryland had to win 2 out of 3, and they did.
Now 25 and 15, right about 60 in the RPI, so still some work to be done. Quickly want to touch on Rutgers. Took care of business, swept a struggling Northwestern team. Rutgers is a squad that may have gotten the wrong end of the NCAA invite stick a year ago. If they want to get back into that conversation, they're going to have to make a big run in May.
Well, and it's not just they're going to have to you're exactly right. They're going to have to do it both in these last 3 weekends in the Big Ten, and they're going to have to do it in the Big Ten tournament. You know, this is a club that, again, was coaches picked top 3. This was a club that, again, was just on the outside, I think, being ranked nationally. Maryland, the only one preseason-wise. Now it seems like they are believing in themselves again. They've got 3 really good pitchers. You've got 4 or 5 guys coming back position from that team last year. And again, Northwestern, again, first year with Jim Foster, you know, you've got a couple guys at Northwestern, you know, great Alice Calarco, that switch hitting catcher that can hit it 500 feet. But for the most part, they're not as talented as Rutgers. Rutgers did what they needed to do.
Scarlet Knights with that sweep have now won 9 of their last 10.